It's Christmas, Theo. The time of miracles. Welcome back, everybody. First, let me say Merry Christmas Eve. I was having a hard time deciding on what video I should put into my release schedule for today, considering it's Christmas Eve. And I haven't done a movie review in a while. The last one I did was the movie Thief, but none of the movies in my film recommendations document were appropriate for Christmas, and then I went, well, maybe I can stretch the definition of recommendation a little bit. So today's recommendation comes from a friend of my younger brother who goes by the name of A-Rod, as well as every single person in existence who has tried to say that Die Hard is a Christmas movie, and I will address that at some point during this review. But that will be in the spoiler section because there's so much that goes into that I feel like I'm going to have to describe in profuse detail what I mean when I go over various aspects that cover the Christmas theme. So yes, we're going over the original Die Hard from 1988, directed by James McTiernan and starring Bruce Willis. Before I get to anything, I just want to say I had no idea that James McTiernan directed this movie. For those of you who have never seen it, James McTiernan also directed the original Predator, the one with Arnold, and I guess that's a good way to kickstart my non-spoiler review, is that I can very much tell that James McTiernan directed it, and all I mean by that is it was actually really, really, really good.
I liked it.
I'll be honest, when something gets so popular in the public discourse, as Die Hard has as a result of the whole Christmas movie debate, you start to wonder if it's really all that good, but I have not seen it before. This was my first viewing of Die Hard, and another part of this is my late father didn't really like Bruce Willis, and he was the one that kind of bestowed my brother and I with our taste in films. And so the fact that he didn't like it kind of shied me away from actually watching it, but I gave it a fair shot and it was actually really good. Now, despite being an action movie, I can tell that this came out towards the end of the action movie bonanza period. Prior to seeing Die Hard, I did see Commando starring Arnold, and I have seen, Rambo First Blood and a decent number of action movies that were set during this time period or were otherwise made during that time. And I can definitely see where this movie was kind of an evolution on that format. Die Hard is far more realistic and logically consistent internally than a lot of those other movies. Now, that's not to dunk on those other movies, but Die Hard is really good with a fundamental part of storytelling. Setup, payoff. I highly recommend that you watch YouTube channels such as Mauler or The Literature Devil in order to more fully understand this, but that is how you tell a story well. And it even applies to small things. Like I said, stick around for the spoilers and I will talk about it in more detail. But to keep it short, even the small stuff that you don't think is going to matter later on in the movie ends up mattering. Not a lot. It's usually proportional to how much it mattered in the first place, but on to performances. Die Hard is what it says on the tin. It's an action movie, so it isn't like some Shakespearean drama, but for what it is, the acting is pretty solid. Bruce Willis is good as the sort of cracking wise, resourceful cop action hero star. Like I said earlier, he's a far more realistic character than, say, John Matrix in Commando. John McClane never does anything like this in the runtime. John McClane handles everything with a pistol and, minor spoiler, a stolen machine gun. He doesn't spray and pray like most action movie heroes do. With the exception of a few catastrophic things that happen later in the movie, most of the stuff John McClane does is very measured and very thought out. I think the separated wife, Holly, was decent enough. She is, I would say, a definite improvement over the sort of boilerplate, boring, cliche, love interest characters in action movies of that period. I'm thinking of stuff like Total Recall and Running Man and Commando. Pretty much all of them have love interests of a sort, and they're all pretty lame. I'll be 100% honest, I was a little bit concerned that the story was going to way too heavily touch on the fact that John McClane and Holly are separated and divorced. I watched the movie last night. I can't remember exactly if they are divorced, but I think they're just estranged, separated. But she did a good job. Sergeant Al, played by Reginald Vell Johnson, was an excellent part of this movie. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about it maybe in the spoiler section, but I was incredibly concerned with the direction they were taking when he showed up in the film. But they subverted my expectations, and all of the snarky one-liners that he gave later in the movie definitely paid off well what they did with his character, because I was kind of concerned, honestly, and they proved me wrong. Also, real quick, I just want to mention, he's not a huge part of the story, but Paul Gleason shows up in this movie. I think he's like the assistant supervisor or some kind of higher-up cop in Los Angeles. He's the superior to Al Powell, who I just talked about. The reason I'm bringing up Paul Gleason is that me, my brother, my whole family really, we have this kind of serial habit of recognizing actors from things and not knowing what we recognize them from. Because as soon as he showed up on screen, I was like, I know this guy from somewhere. And then I remembered, and by remember, I mean I looked it up on Google, he was Clarence Beeks in Trading Places.
Merry New Year!
Happy New Year. In this country, we say Happy New Year.
He wasn't anything special in this movie, but I liked seeing him and he did a good job. He played well off of Al. Hans Gruber, played by Alan Rickman, who I'm sorry in my mind will always be Professor Snape, was excellent. He was cold, he was calculating. All of the twists in the plot, he responds to them well. I will admit I'm not entirely sure what the exact nature of his evil plan, quote unquote, was, but Alan Rickman did a very good job of selling him as a sort of master manipulator, evil terrorist guy. He played well off of Bruce Willis, especially in a particular scene that I will talk about in the spoiler section. He worked well with several of the developments in the kind of spoiler territory that I really wish to avoid. I know this movie's been out for 30 years, but I don't want to spoil it. 2 more points before I kick into high gear with the spoilers. First, and this is more of a joke, but not really, I really appreciate how action movies from this time period always had a gratuitous, pointless, random shot of female toplessness somewhere in the runtime. A relic of a more civilized time, a bygone era. And then, as I said in my review for Thief, this is kind of a spoiler, but not really. The ending is very punchy. It's to the point, it ends, the falling resolution is not that long, and the credits are rolling within like 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 5. Overall, if I were to score Die Hard from 0 to 10, I would place it at an 8 out of 10. And just so you know what kind of falls into that category, the last film I reviewed, Thief, also wound up at an 8 out of 10. And the definition for an 8 out of 10 on my ranking sheet is thus: solid, memorable films that remain in your conscience. They might fail in that they usually work best in a genre-specific context, the genre in this context being action, but they're well made and recommendable. For the record, another action movie that I have in this same ranking is the original Commando with Arnold. Die Hard is also an action movie, so it falls into this category for this reason, but the two films are very different action movies. Die Hard is more of a thinking man's action movie, whereas Commando is just, you know, one-liners on one-liners on one-liners with very little thought. You really don't think about it all that much. The villain is not as smart in Commando. Hans Gruber is very intelligent. So yeah, Die Hard, it's going into my ranking as a 8 out of 10. Alright, I'm going to sound the alarm. From here on, I will be consulting my review guide sheet, and I will be talking about things that probably be spoilers. I know the movie's been out for years, but like I said, I've never seen it before, and I just saw it for the first time when I watched it for this review. So if you haven't watched it already, go watch it. And then you can come back and we can settle whether or not this is a Christmas movie. Final call. Going once. Going twice. Going thrice. Okay, I'm gonna just tie all of these up. As I mentioned in the non-spoiler section, this movie really does a good job of setting things up and then paying them off, both big and small. I knew things were going in a good direction when at the beginning, when John goes into Nakatomi Plaza, Argyle tells him to, call him for this, that, or the other reason, I can't remember. And then John calls Argyle from the hotel room, and the terrorists cut the phone lines at that exact moment. So right from that moment, I knew whoever wrote this did a really good job. Die Hard was written by Roderick Thorpe, Jeb Stewart, and Stephen E. D'Souza. Whatever they did, whatever other movies they've written, they hopefully are good writers because Die Hard was very tightly written. Let's see, what other setups and payoffs were there? This one's more of a large-scale setup payoff, but the fact that it's Christmas actually impacts why John McClane is there in the first place. So when the terrorists do what they do, there's a reason John McClane is there. Okay, a small payoff. I don't even know if this one's a setup payoff in the traditional sense, but John sneaks his way past the bikini pinup poster on the inside of the under construction floor in Nakatomi Plaza. And then later when he's running from the terrorists, he goes down that way again. Like, I don't know if that's technically a setup payoff, but it felt like one to me, and it was good. So, and no, that's not me just, praising the movie for having a girl in a bikini be somewhat relevant to the main character's survival. When Al shows up, I was really nervous. I was actually concerned that he was going to just disappear and that was going to be it. John was just going to have to make his way and fight terrorists without help from the police. And I'm pretty sure John McClane had been fighting with the terrorists in some minor form before that. He was hiding from them. So I guess you could say maybe that was a setup payoff because he tosses one of the terrorists out the window onto Al's patrol car. So that was a very, very, very good setup payoff. If nothing else, it was just a good moment in the movie. I almost lost faith. If they had dragged that out a little bit too long, it probably would have lost me and gone to the absurd, but it was just the right amount of time. And so when Al realizes oh, this is a bit of a major problem situation, it feels earned. Speaking of Al, just to get this out of the way, I do think the terrorist showing up at the end was a little bit much, but Al shoots him, and it pays off the earlier moment where Al is telling McClane over the radio that the reason he's still a beat cop is because he shot a 13-year-old boy, and so he's never been really promoted as a result of that, because there are, as he says, some things that they don't teach you as a rookie. That was excellent. So in that respect, I think it was kind of necessary. It kind of wrapped up that storyline really quickly. And like I said, the climax of the film was really punchy. A major component of the story that could be construed as a setup and a payoff, but I'm not sure, is the fact that John McClane is barefoot the entire time. I mean, from the very beginning of the movie, that guy on the airplane tells him to try and do the fists with his toes to kind of de-stress after flying. And considering that the only exposure I had to that was the epic rap battles of history featuring John McClane, John Rambo, and John Wick.
Ho 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 to quivers and bows, I'm delivering blows, and when they land it won't help to make fists with your toes.
I wasn't sure how that would work, but it's a relatively minor thing for the first, hour of the movie, but when John McClane ends up having having the conversation with Hans Gruber, and you notice as a viewer that Hans Gruber notices as a character that John McClane is not wearing any shoes, it gets paid off because when Hans Gruber and his second-hand man start shooting at John McClane, Gruber explicitly tells his guy to shoot out the glass, and that's because he knows McClane is barefoot, and obviously no one wants to walk or run through gunfire, let alone gunfire over broken glass. So that was an incredibly smart inclusion into the story, and I have to hand it over to the people who made the film for that. And I will say, I mean, holy hell, the blood on the floor when John McClane cuts his feet after that sequence and is in the bathroom like pulling out shards of glass while he's on the radio communicating with Al was excellent. Incredibly bloody. I was kind of cringing and it was hard to watch, but that's just me because I'm squeamish. In fact, relating to that, I would say that Die Hard kind of leans a little bit more heavily into the bombastic, unrealistic things from other action movies of the day during the third act. But I will say that at that point, the movie has built up the third act so well that it almost doesn't matter. It's kind of like the sweet release after the flight on the airplane that John McClane was trying to have in the first place. I will say, in the climax of the movie, the fact that Holly Gennaro says Holly McClane to the reporter was kind of cliche, but I feel like it was earned. I mean, the whole movie she's been locked up in the party at Nakatomi Plaza, and she knows her separated husband is the one taking the fight to the terrorists, and I have a feeling that would have some sort of effect on her passion for John. As far as my criticisms of the movie would go, there are two major moments that really stuck out to me, and one thing that I think kind of just gets brushed under the rug after a certain point. First, when John has to like leap into that one vent and he's using the rifle or the machine gun to hold the rope so that he can climb down and he can't really reach the vent. That was a little bit much, but it didn't go on too long, so I kind of forgave it. And then obviously the rest of the movie happens after that, so I mean, it's an action movie. I have to give it a little bit of leeway. You know, as a member of the action movie genre, it kind of had to use that to an extent, and it didn't overstay its welcome. So, and related to that, when John ties himself with the fire hose when the building is rigged to blow on the rooftop, I'm not really sure how tensile and strong fire hoses are. Presumably they're very strong because Death Battle measured Godzilla's atomic breath with fire hoses.
Scaling to the present, to actually lift his body means the atomic breath must have a force of over 328 trillion psi. That's the equivalent of 1 trillion riot control fire hoses.
I know that's a weird thing to bring up, but I do Godzilla content on the regular, so it just felt a little bit much. Again, it kind of gets glossed over, and I'm kind of okay with it because the rest of the movie is so damn good. Again, it's an action movie, so I can't fault it too much, but The sequence where John McClane drops the chair rigged with explosives and the computer monitor is great. Not much more to say than that. It was just a cool set piece. Like I was mentioning in the non-spoiler section, I really love the bit where Hans Gruber and John McClane kind of have a friendly conversation. Obviously, Gruber is kind of trying to pull the wool over McClane's eyes, but all I could think was, and someone in the comments correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like in action movies in that time period, there weren't really a whole lot of protagonist, antagonist, good guy, bad guy conversation scenes. I rewatched The Running Man at some point, like a month or so before I watched this for the first time, and I don't remember anything like that in Running Man. There's definitely nothing like that in Commando, unless you count the scene at the end with Dylan in Matrix, but...
That's what you want to do, right? I kill you, John. Come on, let the girl go. It's between you and me. Don't deprive yourself of some pleasure. Come on, Bennett. Let's party. I can beat you. I don't hate the girl. I don't hate
raise the girl?
It just felt like a fresh and interesting thing to have Gruber and McClane talking. It also establishes that McClane is a good guy. He didn't immediately assume that he was one of the terrorists. And it also established that Gruber was very good at putting on an accent and manipulating the situation as he understood it to his advantage. So the one thing that was negative that I wanted to bring up, I feel like John having walked on broken glass and the fact that his feet were bleeding profusely was kind of brushed to the side at the end there. The third act basically turns more into a standard action movie, so I can kind of excuse it. Also, at that point, he was probably pumping with adrenaline, so it wasn't terrible for that, but I did notice it. But the movie was so entertaining at that point, it had earned all of the fun points that it was kind of spending, that my brain kind of went, yeah, it's kind of strange, but just let it ride, Henry. Okay, one last thing before we go. The age-old question. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Now, I don't mean to get butt actually with all of you, but as far as I would consider it, this is not a Christmas movie. However, if we want to play a little bit loosely with what we define as a Christmas movie, we could say any Christmas movie is a movie that leverages the holiday season as a crucial element in its plot that, if removed, would severely impact the plot as it plays out. And in that respect, yes, Die Hard is a Christmas movie. The only reason I don't think it's a normal Christmas movie is it doesn't really have much to do with the themes of giving and Santa Claus and presents and reindeer. But there is something I will compare it to in a second. Here are some examples that I noted down in my guide sheet as to how Die Hard integrates the Christmas theming. Approximately 40 minutes into the runtime, when John kills the first terrorist and sends him up the elevator to threaten the rest of the terrorists, he puts a Santa Claus hat on him and he says "Merry Christmas, ho ho ho" in the message he writes on the guy's sweater, shirt, whatever. So immediately I already knew, okay, the fact that they're doing the Christmas theming is not going to be completely moot. Also worth noting is that the Christmas party only exists because the Nakatomi Corporation is having a holiday party for Christmas. That's the only reason why John ends up being there in the first place. So, bam, we're already integrating the Christmas theme incredibly well into the story as it is. The dialogue constantly invokes Christmas. The guy that is in charge of the security cameras and cracking the safe, at one point he says, "Not a creature was stirring except for these guys coming around the back," which integrates the evolving situation with the police with the Christmas theme. I really liked that guy, the vault cracker. He was hilarious. Thankfully, Argyle takes him out, but I thought he was pleasant. I believe at some point, Hans Gruber says, "It's Christmas, Theo, the time of miracles." And then at about an hour and a half into the movie, there's Christmas-based graffiti on the side of the building, which I believe you see when John McClane is like sneaking down a passageway. And then to top it all off, at the end, Argyle says to John McClane, "If this is your idea of Christmas, I gotta be here for New Year's." All of it was just so well integrated. I can understand now, having watched it now, why people say that Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Now, let me say, I think the real reason that I watched Die Hard for the first time, aside from the fact that I thought it would be a good video to put out on Christmas Eve, was the fact that recently I rewatched all of the cutscenes on YouTube for the video game Dead Rising 4. I will not belabor this point. Dead Rising 4 is an awful game with an awful story. But the reason Die Hard made me think of it is because Dead Rising 4 also takes place at Christmas, at least ostensibly. And the entire time I was watching Die Hard, considering I had watched the Dead Rising 4 movie the night before, all I could think was, man, Dead Rising 4 was even worse than I already thought it was. Dead Rising 4 is a horrible story. It completely ruins its main character. I'm not going to wax on and on about how Dead Rising 4 was awful, especially considering most people know that it was awful. But like, Die Hard did a ton of stuff that involved Christmas. It completely justified the fact that it took place around that time of year. At least based on the movie of all the cutscenes in Dead Rising 4, it had no reason to take take place at Christmas. None of the maniacs, psychopaths, for those of you who play actual Dead Rising games, none of those were based on the time of year. The plot really could have been set at any time of year. So in terms of which one implemented the time of the year and the Christmas season better, Die Hard is the clear winner. So in closing, I highly recommend that you guys go and watch Die Hard. If you've already seen it, let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are, and tell me if I've been wrong on any of my assessments. I know the guy that recommended this to me has subscribed to my YouTube channel, so first off, A-Rod, I hope that you enjoyed this review and that my opinions were acceptable, but also know that I'm going to be reviewing several more movies that have been recommended by A-Rod. But I'm going down the list, and I'm trying to kind of do these gradually over time so that it's not just movie review, movie review, movie review. And leave a like if you think my opinions on this movie are acceptable. That's about all the time I have for today, but considering this video will be coming out on Christmas Eve, I would just like to wish all of you a Merry Christmas. And I will say now, this video is being recorded in the past, as most of my videos have been. I'm not going to say when it was recorded, but at the time that I am recording this video, I've held this back for most of the year. I got laid off back in March. All I want for Christmas this year is a new job. I would like to stop bleeding money out of my savings. You know, being on unemployment and stuff is not very fun. I tried to avoid saying that until now, and most people probably aren't even going to care, but it's been hard out here, man. Doing these YouTube videos has been fun. It's been what's kept me sane, because it gets hard, man. I haven't had a very good year. I mean, think about it. It's been 9 months since March. I'm hoping by the time this video comes out, I will have found a new job, but I'm not exactly optimistic. But I don't want to sour the new year, so this is probably going to be the only time I mention that. All of you have a Merry Christmas. I hope Santa brings you lots of presents. Happy holidays, everybody, and I will see you in the next video. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker!